Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all, wherever you are tuning in from tonight, maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful with the world fading away outside. I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe pull the covers up a bit higher and feel the day gently slip away. London fog lay thick upon the city that autumn evening. At 221 B. Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge. Then came the knock. Victim found dead at Southwark Bridge, body torn as if by a wild beast. Scotland Yard saw a tragic animal attack, but Holmes saw a link. The wounds were too precise for mere claws. One link in a chain that would bind a killer. The game is afoot. Chapter 1, and the first link. I set down these events as they occurred in the autumn of 1895, when the chill of impending winter already mingled with the perpetual fog of London. Sherlock Holmes had been restless for days, his violin producing discordant notes that echoed through our rooms at 221 B. Baker Street. The coal fire crackled warmly in the grate, countering the bitter fog seeping through the windows, while the sharp scent of strong tobacco from Holmes's Persian slipper filled the air, mingling with the faint leather smell of our worn armchairs. Mrs. Hudson climbed the 17 steps with a tray of hot tea, its steam carrying a bitter edge that promised relief from the damp outside. "A visitor, Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice weary from years of late-night summons. Holmes set aside his Stradivarius, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar light of anticipation as he steepled his fingers under his chin. The door opened to admit Inspector Lestrade, his rough tweed coat glistening with moisture, bringing the unmistakable odor of coal smoke and Thames mud clinging to his boots. He stamped his feet on the mat, the cold cobblestone's chill still evident in his reddened cheeks. "Holmes, we've a most peculiar business in Southwark," he announced, his breath visible in the warm room. "A nobleman dead, torn to pieces as if by some wild creature." Holmes drew thoughtfully upon his pipe, the smooth clay warming in his hand. "Pray, elaborate, Lestrade. Data. I cannot make bricks without clay." The inspector sank into the worn leather armchair, the fabric creaking under his weight as rain began to patter against the window panes. "Lord Edmund Harrington, found near Southwark Bridge at first light," Lestrade continued, his voice dropping low. "Body mauled, deep claw marks, teeth impressions, blood everywhere. Full moon last night, and the dock folk are already muttering of a werewolf stalking the fog-bound streets." The distant moan of foghorns from the river underscored his words, lending an eerie weight to the tale. Holmes's eyes narrowed, the fire's crackle punctuating the brief silence. "Werewolf, superstition clouds judgment, Lestrade. You know my methods. Let us examine the facts." He rose and paced rapidly before the hearth, the floorboards creaking under his swift steps, his ulster brushing the chemical apparatus scattered on the side table. We departed promptly in a hansom cab, the wheels clattering over slick cobbles, the damp newspaper on the seat adhering unpleasantly to my trousers. The fog thickened as we crossed the Thames, its muddy, briny scent overpowering, mixed with the acrid bite of gunpowder drifting from nearby factories. Big Ben tolled the hour, its deep chimes vibrating through the mist like a warning. The crime scene lay cordoned by constables under flickering gaslight. The bitter fog clung to our coats, chilling my bones, despite thick wool. Lord Harrington's body rested beneath a sheet on the cold ground, slick with blood and mud that squelched roughly under my boots. The air carried the sharp tang of carbolic soap from the preliminary examination, overlaid with the metallic reek of fresh blood. Holmes knelt beside the corpse, magnifying glass in hand, undeterred by the morgue-like chill. "Observe, Watson. The wounds are deep. They're yet uniform in their spacing and depth." He traced a gash with a gloved finger, the leather smooth against the torn flesh, too precise for the random fury of a beast. claw marks. Surely, I ventured, the lingering bitterness of morning coffee still on my tongue. Holmes shook his head, his breath clouding in the cold air. The spacing suggests a manufactured instrument, perhaps iron prongs or a custom tool. No natural creature leaves such regularity. Lestrade scoffed, his heavy footsteps crunching gravel nearby. A tool? Come now, Holmes. Look at these tracks in the mud. He pointed to deep, paw-like impressions, the earth damp and clinging. Holmes bent closer, knees sinking into the soft ground. The first link, Watson. These prints are pressed unevenly. The weight distribution is that of a bipedal man, shifting awkwardly, yet not a quadruped in natural motion. Such irregularity I once observed in the case of the Hound of the Baskervilles, where a spectral legend concealed mortal cunning. The moorland tracks, apparently demonic, proved to be those of a large dog coated in phosphorus, its gait altered by training and fear, deduction showing how superstition forges false chains, while the ground remembers every human step. Therefore, no werewolf prowls these fog-bound banks, but a man simulating one. The link forges strong, Watson. Did you see it form? I stared in astonishment as the chain began to take shape in my mind. But the purpose of such a disguise? Holmes rose, brushing rough tweed from his knees, fabric catching on his nails. Motive will reveal itself, link by link. He turned to Lestrade, the crackle of a nearby brazier warming the constable's hands. Who found the body? A dock worker at dawn, Lestrade answered, flipping open his damp notebook, the leather cover smelling faintly of oil. As for suspects, Harrington had many enemies. His brother Sir Reginald stands to inherit the title and fortune. There is a business rival, Mr. Elias Thorne, the dismissed valet Jenkins, a discarded mistress, Miss Eliza Voss, Dr. Harlan Crowe, that eccentric who lectures on lycanthropy, and old Tom, the mad beggar who rants of night beasts under the bridge. Holmes nodded thoughtfully, his pipe smoke curling like the fog itself. Potential links, yet untested. The rain grew heavier, drumming on the iron girders above. We returned to the body once more. Holmes lifted the sheet briefly, revealing pale flesh under the wavering gaslight. This faint bruise on the neck, subtle, yet unmistakable. He pressed gently, the texture yielding unnaturally. Struck or choked before the mauling began. A staged attack, then, I murmured, as Thames foghorns moaned mournfully in the distance. Holmes's tobacco scent offered small comfort amid the horror. Precisely. Incapacitated first, then the wounds inflicted to suggest a monster. Lestrade grumbled as another hansom approached, wheels clattering rhythmically. You'll need far more than theories, Holmes. He pulled his wool coat tighter, the rough fibres rasping against his skin. Back at 221B, the warm fire welcomed us, driving away the bitter fog's chill. Mrs. Hudson appeared with glasses of sweet brandy, its taste rich and warming on my tongue. Holmes paced once more, floor creaking, eyes distant. The mud caked on his boots, black earth flecked with iron ore. That soil lies is near the Southwark foundries, not this riverside path. The implication dawned slowly. Holmes drew deeply on his pipe, smoke wreathing his face. He was killed elsewhere and brought here. Another link forged. Looking back, I should have seen the connection sooner. Holmes settled into his chair, steepling his fingers again. This echoes the affair of the Twisted Lip, where a beggar's rags concealed a gentleman's double life. The opium den's grime and mismatched soil traces forged a chain that revealed relocation and deception, turning apparent poverty into hidden wealth. Therefore, Harrington met his end in some other place, transported here to feed the werewolf myth. The bind tightens already. What chain would you build from these observations, dear reader? Evening deepened, and the gasogene fizzing softly as Holmes mixed a soda. The coal fire crackled steadily, its heat a steady balm. More data awaits tomorrow, Watson. I retired to bed. The sounds of London, distant footsteps on stairs, fading cab wheels, gradually subsiding. Holmes remained by the fire, vigilant, his mind already forging ahead. The first link, forged. The chain begins. Chiptantititsays, forging connections. As I continue this account, the events of the following day remain vivid in my memory, the fog still lying heavy over London like a conspiratorial veil. Holmes rose before dawn, already at work among his chemical apparatus, the faint, acrid smell of carbolic mingling with the bitter coffee Mrs. Hudson had left, steaming on the table. The coal fire crackled warmly in the grate, and its heat a welcome contrast to the bitter chill that seeped through the windows of 221 B. Baker Street. "We must visit the suspects today, Watson," Holmes declared, reaching into his Persian slipper for a pinch of tobacco, the strong scent rising sharply as he packed his pipe. Links multiply only through direct observation and inquiry. He paced rapidly before the hearth, the floorboards creaking under his steps, his eyes already alight with purpose. Our first call was to Sir Reginald Harrington's residence in Mayfair. The hansom cab rattled over wet cobbles, the leather seats damp beneath us, carrying the mingled smells of coal smoke from passing chimneys and the faint leather polish of the interior. Big Ben tolled distantly as we arrived, its deep notes cutting through the fog. Sir Reginald received us in his study, in a room warmed by a roaring fire that sent shadows dancing across leather-bound books. His voice was deep and measured, though grief, or perhaps calculation, tightened the corners of his mouth. "My brother's death is a tragedy beyond words. That monstrous thing in Southwark, the old family curse, made flesh." Holmes settled into a chair, drawing thoughtfully on his pipe. "Curse, Sir Reginald. Pray explain." The baronet paced slowly, his boots thumping softly on the thick carpet. "An ancestor was said to have been afflicted with lycanthropy centuries ago. Edmund laughed at such tales, yet last night—" His hands clenched, the rough tweed of his sleeve brushing the mantel. "I was at my club all evening. The steward will confirm it. I noticed a faint smell of gunpowder clinging to his cuffs." "You are a sportsman, sir?" I asked. He nodded curtly and offered us brandy. Its sweet warmth lingered pleasantly on my tongue after the cold journey. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Your alibi is noted. We shall verify it." As we departed, the fog dampened our coats once more, its chill biting through wool. "A small link, Watson. Gunpowder residue fresh, unlikely from yesterday's hunt. The chain begins to form." Our next destination was Mr. Elias Thorne's warehouse near the Southwark docks. The Thames mud scent grew stronger with every step, closer to the river, mixed with coal smoke pouring from tall chimneys. Rough brick walls met my gloved hand as we entered. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stored leather and machine oil, while rain pattered steadily on the tin roof and workers' heavy footsteps echoed. Thorne, broad-shouldered and blunt, met us among crates. "Harrington, the man ruined me. Delayed shipments, cheated on contracts. Good riddance, I say." His voice carried raw resentment. Holmes examined a nearby ledger, its pages smooth under his fingers. "Your whereabouts last night?" Thorne crossed his arms, the rough tweed of his coat straining. "Here, supervising loading till midnight. Half a dozen men saw me." Outside, Holmes paused beside fresh boot prints in the mud, deep, with the same uneven pressure as those at the bridge. "Another connection," he murmured. "The link was there. Did you forge it before Holmes?" We pressed on to the cramped Whitechapel lodging of Jenkins, the dismissed valet. The narrow stairs creaked underfoot, worn smooth by years of tenants, while the bitter fog infiltrated every crack, carrying the heavy odor of stale tobacco smoke. A small fire crackled feebly in the grate, barely warming the cold room. Jenkins's voice was bitter. Sacked without warning. Accused of theft I never committed. I'd not lift a finger to harm him, though. He shifted uneasily in his rough tweed chair, which creaked in protest. Your movements last night? Holmes asked, pipe smoke curling between them. At the Black Anchor in Southwark. Mates will swear to it. The tea he offered tasted bitter, matching his mood. Holmes noted iron filings clinging to Jenkins's sleeve. You work at a foundry now? Jenkins admitted to odd jobs, a possible link, but not yet forged. Miss Eliza Voss received us in her neat Bloomsbury flat, where the air carried the faint scent of damp roses and carbolic soap. Silk cushions felt soft beneath us, the wooden floor hard under our boots. She spoke through tears. He promised me everything, then cast me aside. But murder? I could never. Holmes softened slightly. And last night, she whispered, alone here, heartbroken. A telegram lay on her table, urgent words from Harrington himself. A hidden connection, Holmes noted quietly. Watson missed it, did you? Dr. Harlan Crow's laboratory near the bridge assaulted us with chemical fumes like diluted gunpowder. Beakers bubbled softly, glass smooth under gaslight, distant hansom wheels clattered outside. Lycanthropy is no myth, it is physiology waiting to be unlocked, Crow proclaimed, eyes fever bright. Your interest in Harrington? Holmes asked, steepling his fingers. He funded my work, then withdrew support. I was experimenting here all night, witnesses in the lecture hall. The room was cold, despite hot tea offered. Their claw-like metal tools lay on his bench. Tools that could mimic wounds, Holmes observed. Finally, beneath Southwark Bridge, we found old Tom, the beggar. Rags, caked with Thames mud, rough and gritty to the touch. Foghorns moaned mournfully. Rain drummed on scattered debris. His voice rasped. The beast, I seen it, tall as a man, fur black as night, howling. Describe it precisely, Holmes urged gently. Tom gibbered incoherently, pointing at shadows. No clear alibi, only madness. The bitter fog bit deep, his tiny fire's coal smoke stinging our eyes, back at it 221B that evening. The gasogene fizzed as Holmes prepared a soda, the coal fire crackling warmly against the encroaching chill. Brandy glowed, sweet in our glasses. Holmes reflected aloud. Alibis to test, motives to weigh, physical traces accumulating. Links are forging, Watson. The chain takes shape. The connection seems invisible. Can you see it yet? Links forging. The chain takes shape. Chapter 3. The chain grows. Reflecting upon that crucial morning, I am struck by how the fog seemed to thicken deliberately, as though the city itself wished to conceal the growing chain of evidence. Holmes insisted we return to Southwark Bridge at first light. The hansom cab clattered over glistening cobbles, its wheels throwing up fine sprays of mud, while the bitter fog chilled our faces and seeped through every seam of our coats. The persistent smell of Thames mud, mixed with drifting coal smoke from riverside chimneys, accompanied us all the way. Constables still guarded the cordoned area beneath flickering gas lamps, whose yellow light barely pierced the mist. Footsteps echoed dully on wet stone. The distant fog horns moaned like warnings from the river. Holmes knelt once more beside the spot where the body had lain, his magnifying glass catching what little dawn light existed, the cold ground numbing his knees through the rough tweed of his trousers. We overlooked details in yesterday's haste, Watson, he said quietly, scraping at the mud with a small knife. The earth came away in damp clumps, revealing tiny flecks of reddish iron ore embedded within the black soil. This combination, river silt overlaid with foundry residue, cannot have come from the bridge path alone. The air still carried a faint trace of carbolic from the night's examination, sharp against the heavier river odors. Nearby, half buried in trampled grass, Holmes's keen eye caught something else. A single discarded glove of fine kid leather, monogrammed EEH in faint gold thread. He lifted it carefully between thumb and forefinger. "Observe, Watson. The stitching along the cuff is quite fresh, machine sewn within the last month, yet the leather shows no wear consistent with daily use by a gentleman of Lord Harrington's habits." He brought it close to his nose. A trace of gunpowder lingered in the fibres. Not the victim's everyday glove. Planted, perhaps. Inspector Lestrade arrived shortly after, his heavy boots crunching gravel, hot tea steaming from a metal flask in his hand. The warmth was welcome against the morgue-like cold that clung to the scene. "Back so soon, Holmes? Found your werewolf yet?" he asked, with his customary dry edge. Holmes ignored the jest and held up the glove. This fibre caught in the seam, wool from a rare Highland breed, and dyed a particular deep green. Such wool is uncommon in London tailoring. He connected the observation swiftly. "This recalls the singular affair of the blue carbuncle, Lestrade. A simple hat band yielded a strand of unusually coarse hair and a trace of lime in the sweatband. From those minute links, we traced the stone from a Christmas goose to a convicted felon. The hat remembered its owner far better than he remembered to destroy it. So here, the glove remembers its true wearer. Therefore, this glove was not lost by Lord Harrington in his final moments, but placed deliberately to mislead. The link forges strong. Holmes saw 3 links already. How many did you spot, dear reader? We moved beneath the bridge's iron girders, rain beginning to patter steadily on the metal above. Then the textures of rusted bolts felt rough and cold under my gloved fingers as I steadied myself. Holmes crouched again, studying overlapping footprints, some clearly human, others the artificial paw marks pressed into softer mud. "The beast prints overlay the man's at several points. The forger stepped in his own trail." A few paces further, caught on a jagged piece of iron, hung a small torn scrap of silk cloth, blood-stained and still faintly scented with pipe tobacco. Not the rich blend Holmes favoured, but something cheaper and sharper. Holmes tucked it into an envelope with care. Not Harrington's handkerchief, too coarse for his station, another deliberate trace. The inspector watched, arms folded. "You're building quite the chain, Holmes." Big Ben tolled the hour far across the water, its notes heavy in the damp air, and Holmes paced the length of the scene, boots crunching, the crackle of a watchman's brazier providing brief warmth as we passed. The primary wounds were inflicted here, but the initial incapacitation, the bruise on the neck, occurred elsewhere. Lividity patterns in the limbs show the body was moved after death, then arranged for dramatic effect. I sipped from Lestrade's flask. The tea was strong and hot, its bitterness cutting through the fog's cloying chill. "Transported in what? A cart, seat, a cab?" Holmes nodded. "Likely a closed vehicle. No wheel marks remain in this soft ground, but the iron flecks suggest proximity to one of the foundries." We walked the short distance to the nearest ironworks, where the roar of bellows and clang of hammers greeted us. Heat blasted from open doors, countering the fog's bite. In the air tasted of molten metal and coal dust. The foreman, wiping sweat from his brow with a leather apron, confirmed a disturbance the previous night. 2 gentlemen arguing near the back gate. Well-dressed, one of them. Left in a hurry. His description matched Mr. Elias Thorne. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The chain grows, Watson. Thorne's warehouse lies but a few streets distant." Returning to the bridge, Holmes stooped once more and unearthed a small brass button half sunk in mud, its surface engraved with a familiar crest, Harrington's own. "Sir Reginald's, or merely another red herring?" Rain drummed harder on the girders overhead, soaking our collars. That evening, at 221 B Baker Street, the fire burned brightly, chasing the lingering chill from our bones. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps sounded on the 17 stairs as she brought a tray of supper. The warm aroma of roast beef briefly overpowered the tobacco smoke that clung to Holmes's coat. He sat before the hearth, steepling his fingers, pipe in hand. The glove links to Crow's laboratory. similar chemical traces on the leather. The silk scrap carries Thorne's cheaper tobacco. The button may belong to Reginald. Yet, the iron ore and foundry proximity point elsewhere. He paused, eyes distant. This echoes the Musgrave ritual, where ancient verses and a butler's careful measurements forged a chain from dusty cellar to violent death. What seemed ritual proved a calculated murder, master's family legend. The chain grows stronger. Logic binds. Chapter 4. Testing the links. The next phase of our investigation demanded rigorous testing of every link we had so far forged, for a chain is only as strong as its weakest member. Danes Holmes rose early, the coal fire already crackling warmly in the grate at 221B Baker Street, its heat driving back the persistent bitter fog that pressed against the window panes. The sharp smell of his strong tobacco mingled with the faint leather scent of our armchairs as he reviewed notes by the light of the gasogene. "Today we shall apply pressure, Watson," he said, drawing thoughtfully upon his pipe. "Weak links will shatter, strong ones will hold." His eyes gleamed with that peculiar light as he paced before the hearth, floorboards creaking under swift steps. Our first test took us to Sir Reginald Harrington's club in St. James's. The hansom cab rattled over damp cobbles, wheels clattering rhythmically, while coal smoke drifted in from passing chimneys, and the leather seats felt cold and slightly sticky beneath us. Inside the club, the air was thick with cigar smoke, and the warmth of a roaring fire, polished wood, gleamed under gaslight. The steward, a thin man with a precise moustache, consulted the leather-bound visitor's book. "Sir Reginald arrived at 7 and remained until 11:30, he stated firmly. Holmes leaned closer. "Yet the book shows no entry for his brief departure at 9:15. The steward blinked. "A momentary absence for fresh air, perhaps." Holmes's gaze narrowed. "In such dense fog? Unlikely." The steward shifted uncomfortably, the smooth oak of the desk under his fingers. A weak link cracked. Reginald's alibi, so confidently offered, now showed fracture under scrutiny. We moved next to Elias Thorne's warehouse, near the docks. Rain pattered steadily on the tin roof, workers' heavy footsteps echoing inside, and the air heavy with machine oil, leather, and coal smoke. Thorne met us among towering crates, arms crossed over rough tweed. Holmes produced the scrap of silk cloth found at the bridge. "This bears traces of your particular cheap tobacco blend, Mr. Thorne." The merchant's face darkened. "Coincidence. Hundreds smoke the same." "Yet the bloodstain matches Lord Harrington's type," Holmes continued calmly. "And your men now admit you left the warehouse for nearly an hour during the critical time." Thorne blustered, but the colour drained from his cheeks. Another link shattered. Motive strong, opportunity present, yet physical capability for the elaborate staging lacking. Thorne was cleared of the act itself. The hansom carried us through thickening fog to Jenkins's Whitechapel lodging once more. The narrow stairs creaked under our boots, yet worn smooth by countless feet. The bitter fog infiltrated the hallway, carrying stale tobacco and damp newspaper. Jenkins opened the door warily, his small fire crackling feebly against the cold. Holmes held up the iron filings from the valet's sleeve. "You work nights at the foundry now?" Jenkins nodded reluctantly. "Extra money, but I was at the Black Anchor pub till closing. Asked the landlord." We had already done so. The man's testimony held firm, corroborated by 3 others. This link held solid. Jenkins had neither the resources nor the cunning for such deception. Miss Eliza Voss's Bloomsbury flat offered brief respite. The air carried faint carbolic and wilting roses. Silk cushions felt soft beneath us, contrasting the hard wooden floor. She greeted us tearfully, hands trembling. Holmes showed her the telegram from Harrington. "Threatening words, Miss Voss." She bowed her head. "He ended it cruelly. I wrote back in anger, but I never left this room." Her landlady confirmed it. The frail woman had been heard sobbing through thin walls all night. The emotional link broke cleanly. Motive existed, but physical strength and opportunity did not. Dr. Harlan Crow's laboratory near the bridge assaulted the senses with chemical fumes resembling diluted gunpowder. Beakers bubbled softly. Claw-like metal tools lay on the bench under gaslight. Crow, wild-eyed, demonstrated one instrument. For anatomical modeling only. Holmes compared it to photographs of the wounds. The spacing matches precisely. Crow paled. I lent tools to a colleague. Experiments, nothing more. Yet his lecture hall witnesses placed him miles away during the attack. This link held tentatively. Tools relevant, but timeline excluded him. Beneath Southwark Bridge, we found old Tom, huddled by his tiny coal fire, rags caked with Thames mud, rough and gritty. Foghorns moaned mournfully, rain drummed on scattered debris. His voice rasped. "The beast, black fur, eyes like coals," Holmes questioned gently. "You saw it clearly?" Tom gibbered, pointing at shadows. "No strength, no precision, only madness. This link shattered entirely. Delusion, not design." Back at 221B that evening, the gasogene fizzed softly as Holmes prepared a soda. The coal fire crackled warmly, chasing the fog's chill from our bones. Mrs. Hudson brought sweet brandy. Its taste lingered pleasantly on my tongue. Holmes paced slowly, steepling his fingers. 5 suspects tested. Thorne's opportunity collapsed under contradiction. Jenkins and Voss lack capacity. Crow's timeline protects him. Old Tom is harmless. Only Reginald's alibi fractured under pressure, and the brass button bearing his crest was found at the scene. He paused before the hearth. "Weak links have shattered, Watson. The true chain now emerges clearly. The connection seems invisible no longer. Can you see which remaining link binds the murderer? Weak links shattered. The true chain emerges." Chapter 5. The chain tightens. By now the chain of evidence had grown taut, each link tested and proven, yet the final binding remained to be drawn tight around the guilty party. Holmes declared the moment had come for confrontation. The fog that morning lay exceptionally thick over London, swallowing gaslights and muffling every sound as though the city held its breath. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire burned steadily, its warmth and crackle a small defiance against the bitter chill outside, while the sharp scent of Holmes's tobacco mingled with the faint leather smell of our travelling coats. "We summoned them all to Harrington's Mayfair residence this afternoon," Holmes announced, pacing before the hearth, floorboards creaking under his rapid steps. "Lestrade will bring constables. The chain tightens today. No escape remains. We travelled by hansom cab through the fog-bound streets, wheels clattering dully on wet cobbles, the leather seats cold beneath us. Coal smoke drifted in from chimneys, distant foghorns moaned like omens from the river. Big Ben tolled heavily as we reached the grand house in Mayfair, its windows glowing faintly against the mist. Inside, the drawing room was already prepared, fire roaring in the marble grate, warm against the damp that clung to every coat and boot. Mrs. Hudson had sent ahead a tray of strong tea whose bitter steam rose comfortingly. Sweet brandy waited in crystal decanters for later. Lestrade stood near the door, rough tweed coat still damp, arms folded, while 4 constables waited discreetly in the hall. Their heavy footsteps muffled by thick carpets. The suspects arrived one by one. Sir Reginald Harrington entered first, face pale but composed, the rough tweed of his jacket brushing the doorframe. Elias Thorne followed, broad shoulders tense, smelling faintly of machine oil and coal dust. Jenkins. The valet came quietly, eyes downcast, iron filings still visible on his sleeve under gaslight. Miss Eliza Voss arrived last, trembling slightly in her fur-trimmed cloak, the faint scent of wilting roses clinging to her. Dr. Harlan Crow bustled in, with a satchel of papers, chemical odour trailing him like a shadow. Old Tom, the beggar, was mercifully absent. His madness had already excluded him. Holmes stood before the fire, steepling his fingers, pipe in hand, eyes gleaming with that peculiar light. "Gentlemen, madam, we are gathered to close this matter. One among you staged Lord Harrington's death to resemble the attack of a mythical beast." Murmurs rippled through the room. The fire crackled sharply. Holmes held up the kid glove found at the scene. "This was planted near the body. The monogram is Lord Harrington's, yet the leather shows no wear of daily use, and the lining carries gunpowder residue and a trace of your particular Highland wool dye." "Sir Reginald—" Reginald stiffened. "Preposterous! I was at my club." "Your club log shows a 30-minute absence," Holmes countered calmly. "Long enough to reach Southwark by cab in fog, if one knows the back ways." Thorne laughed harshly. "Then why not accuse me? I had motive aplenty." "Because your warehouse men recanted their timed alibi under gentle pressure," Holmes replied. "Yet you lack the precision and the tools for such elaborate wounds." He turned to Crow. "Your claw instruments match the spacing of the gashes precisely, yet lecture hall witnesses place you lecturing at the time of death." Crow nodded vigorously. "Exactly so." Holmes produced the blood-stained silk scrap. "This bears your cheaper tobacco, Mr. Thorne, but only as a red herring. The true staging required access to foundry iron ore and a closed vehicle." He faced Reginald again. "Your estate borders the Southwark foundries. Your crest button was unearthed at the scene. And this—" He drew a folded letter from his pocket, its edges scented faintly with the same tobacco as Reginald's pipe. "A blackmail demand you sent to your brother, threatening exposure of certain gambling debts unless he paid at once. He refused. You struck him at the foundry, strangled him into unconsciousness, then used Crow's borrowed tools to mutilate the body and create the werewolf illusion." Reginald's face drained of colour. "Lies!" At that instant, he bolted for the door. Lestrade shouted. Constables moved, but Reginald shoved past, bursting into the foggy street. Holmes and I gave chase, boots pounding on cold, wet cobbles, the bitter fog stinging our eyes and throats. Rain began to fall harder, drumming on rooftops and splashing under our feet. Gaslights flickered like dying stars. Hansom cabs loomed suddenly out of the mist, horses snorting. Reginald ran blindly toward the river, breath ragged, rough tweed coat flapping. We pursued through narrow alleys, textures of rough brick scraping our shoulders, the smell of Thames mud growing stronger with every step. Foghorns blared mournfully. Near Southwark Bridge, he stumbled on slick stone, nearly fell, then turned at bay beneath the iron girders. Holmes advanced slowly, rain dripping from his ulster. "It is over, Sir Reginald. The chain is forged. Every link, glove, a button, letter, iron ore, timeline. Binds you?" Reginald's shoulders slumped. Rain plastered his hair. His voice broke. Nay, he would have let the estate fall to ruin. "My debts, I only meant to frighten him." This desperate flight and cornering echoed the grim pursuit in the speckled band, where a doctor's deadly device, a trained snake sent through a ventilator, had been exposed by the same relentless logic. Bellpool, whistle, and saucer of milk forged a chain of circumstantial evidence that bound familial greed to murder most foul. So, here the false beast and the forged wounds bound fraternal betrayal. Before Holmes explains fully. What does this sudden flight and the accumulated evidence chain tell you, dear reader? The chain tightens. No escape now. Chapter 6. Links to the past, with Sir Reginald Harrington, safely in custody. The bitter fog that had shrouded London for days at last began to thin, as though the city itself exhaled in relief. Yet the chain of evidence was not fully forged until we understood not merely the how of the crime, but the deep roots from which it had grown. Holmes insisted we trace the history that bound brother to brother in so fatal a knot. At Scotland Yard, the following morning, the air in the record room felt cold and stale. heavy with the smell of damp paper, old ink, and faint carbolic from the cleaners' buckets. Gas lamps hissed softly overhead. Lestrade's heavy footsteps echoed on the stone floor as he brought forward the relevant files. Reginald Harrington's affairs were in worse shape than even the family admitted, Lestrade said, spreading yellowed documents across the scarred oak table. Gambling debts at White's and the Reform. Thousands. Creditors pressing hard. His brother Edmund had bailed him out twice before, but refused the third time. Holmes bent over the papers, his magnifying glass catching the weak light. Observe the dates, Watson. The final refusal came by telegram 10 days before the murder, sent from Edmund's Mayfair study to Reginald's country seat near the Southwark foundries. He tapped a folded slip, and here, the reply, scrawled in haste, "You leave me no choice." The texture of the cheap telegraph paper felt brittle under my fingers. The ink had smudged slightly from damp. Outside, rain pattered against the narrow windows, Big Ben tolling distantly through the lingering mist. Holmes drew upon his pipe, the strong tobacco scent cutting through the musty air. "Reginald's estate borders one of the smaller ironworks," he continued. "He had access to the very soil that caked his brother's boots, black earth flecked with iron ore. He borrowed Dr. Crow's experimental claw tools under pretext of anatomical curiosity for a private lecture. The glove, his own monogram, planted deliberately to suggest confusion or suicide. The brass button torn from his coat in the struggle. Every physical trace leads back to him." We returned to 221B Baker Street in the early afternoon. The coal fire burned brightly, its warmth chasing the chill from our bones after the cold archives. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps sounded on the 17 stairs as she brought a tray of hot tea and sweet biscuits. The bitter steam rose comfortingly, mingling with the faint leather smell of our armchairs. Holmes settled before the hearth, steepling his fingers, eyes distant as he reviewed the chain once more. "The motive is as old as Cain," he murmured. "Inheritance masked as family curse." The Reginald revived the ancient werewolf legend, known only within the Harrington line, to disguise fratricide as supernatural vengeance. He struck Edmund at the foundry gate during an arranged meeting, choked him into unconsciousness, then mutilated the body with Crow's tools to create the illusion of claws and fangs, transported in his own closed carriage, arranged the scene under the bridge where old Tom's ravings would lend credence. The full moon was mere coincidence, yet perfect theatre. I sipped the strong tea, its bitterness sharp on my tongue, and the silk scrap with Thorne's tobacco. A red herring. Reginald visited Thorne's warehouse days earlier to discuss a fictitious business matter, left the scrap deliberately, knowing suspicion would fall there briefly. Weak link, easily broken. Holmes rose and paced slowly before the fire, any floorboards creaking under his steps. "This case recalls in its structure the Norwood builder, Watson. There a man faked his own death to entrap an enemy, constructing an entire hidden room and planting false clues, bloodstains, a forged will, timed disappearances. Every link appeared to point toward accident or suicide, yet the smallest physical traces, fresh plaster dust on a trouser cuff, a mismatched footprint, forged the true chain that bound the murderer. So here, the werewolf myth was the elaborate facade, but the iron ore in the mud, the fresh stitching on the glove, the blackmail telegram, all spoke of human greed, not supernatural fury. He paused, drawing deeply on his pipe, smoke curling toward the ceiling, like the fog outside. The past and present are one unbroken chain. Reginald did not invent the family legend. He merely weaponized it. His ancestors' supposed affliction, recorded in dusty parish registers, was likely nothing more than epilepsy, misunderstood in medieval times. Yet the tale persisted, whispered at family gatherings, until Reginald saw its use. Fear is the oldest deception, Watson. Observation is its only antidote. I looked back over the accumulated evidence: the glove, the button, the iron-flecked mud, the claw tools, the timeline of debts and refusals, and marveled at how each seemingly disparate piece now locked together with terrible inevitability. "You saw the shape of it almost from the first link," I said quietly. Holmes gave a small, rare smile. "The first observation is always the seed. The rest is merely patient forging." Outside, the rain eased. A shaft of weak sunlight pierced the thinning fog, touching the worn Persian rug. The gasogene fizzed softly on the side table. Holmes plucked absently at the strings of his Stradivarius, the notes low and thoughtful. "The criminal is bound, yet the lesson endures. Superstition thrives where facts are ignored. Deduction restores order." I set down my cup, the porcelain warm against my palm. "And the innocent parties, Miss Voss, Jenkins, even Crow, will be spared further suspicion." "Precisely. Their links were tested and found wanting. Only one chain held." Evening drew on. The coal fire crackled steadily, its heat a steady comfort. Holmes sat once more, pipe in hand, eyes reflecting the flames. Past and present, one unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The complete chain. The fog had finally lifted from London's streets, leaving the air crisp and the gas lights burning with unusual clarity on that late autumn evening. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire roared in the grate, its warmth spreading through the familiar room, where the sharp scent of Holmes's strong tobacco mingled with the faint leather smell of our armchairs and the polished wood of the mantel. Mrs. Hudson had just ascended the 17 stairs with a large tray of strong tea and sweet biscuits, the bitter steam rising comfortingly as she set it down. She withdrew, quietly, sensing the gravity of what was to come. Inspector Lestrade had arranged for the key parties to gather once more, this time in our own sitting room rather than the Mayfair residence. Sir Reginald Harrington sat handcuffed in the worn leather armchair nearest the fire, his rough tweed coat creased and damp from the journey from the cells. Beside him stood 2 constables, their boots planted firmly on the rug. Miss Eliza Voss occupied the settee, pale but composed, a lace handkerchief twisted in her fingers. Jenkins, the valet, stood near the window, iron filings still faintly visible on his sleeve. Dr. Harlan Crowe fidgeted with his satchel of papers, chemical odour clinging to him. Elias Thorne leaned against the wall, arms folded, the smell of machine oil faint about him. Lestrade himself stood by the door, notebook open, ready to record every word. Holmes stood before the hearth, back to the flames, steepling his fingers as the fire crackled behind him. His eyes gleamed with that peculiar light of finality. "Gentlemen, madam, we are assembled to close this matter once and for all. Every link in the chain has been forged. Tonight I shall display them one by one, so that no doubt remains." He turned first to the small table beside him, where he had laid out the physical evidence under the gaslight. Physical evidence? The strongest links. First, the kid glove found near the body, monogrammed E.H., yet unworn, its lining bearing gunpowder residue, and a rare Highland wool dye, found only in Sir Reginald's wardrobe. Second, the brass button bearing the Harrington crest, torn loose during the struggle at the Foundry Gate and dropped at Southwark Bridge. Third, the iron ore-flecked mud on the victim's boots, matching soil from the foundry adjacent to Sir Reginald's country estate. Fourth, Dr. Crowe's claw-like anatomical tools, borrowed by Sir Reginald under pretext of scholarly interest, and their spacing matches the wounds precisely. Fifth, the blood-stained silk scrap, deliberately scented with Thorne's tobacco to mislead, yet bearing no other trace connecting Thorne to the act. Reginald shifted in his chair, the handcuffs clinking softly. "Timeline links next," Holmes continued. "Sir Reginald's club log shows a 35-minute absence between 9:15 and 9:50, precisely the window required to reach Southwark by hansom in fog, commit the crime, and return. His own coachman later admitted driving him to the Foundry Gate that night under instruction to wait in a side lane. The lividity in Lord Harrington's limbs confirms the body was moved post-mortem and arranged under the bridge. An act requiring perhaps 20 minutes, consistent with the timeline. Jenkins nodded slowly from his place by the window. I saw 2 gentlemen arguing near the Foundry that night, one tall, in a dark coat like Sir Reginald's. Witness links, Holmes said, inclining his head. Jenkins observed the quarrel. Miss Voss overheard Reginald threaten Edmund over the telephone days earlier. You leave me no choice. Old Tom's ravings of a tall beast lent unwitting credence to the werewolf illusion Reginald wished to create. Even Dr. Crow's lecture hall audience confirms he himself was absent from the scene. His tools used, but not his hand. Miss Voss spoke quietly. He told me once the family curse would claim Edmund if he did not yield. Motive links, Holmes pressed on. Sir Reginald's gambling debts, documented at White's and the Reform, amounted to over £8,000. Creditors threatened seizure of the estate. Edmund had refused a third bailout. Ignorance shown by the urgent telegram chain. Inheritance of title and fortune offered the only escape. Reginald revived the ancient Harrington werewolf legend, recorded in parish registers as likely misunderstood epilepsy, to disguise fratricide as supernatural vengeance. He drew a final folded paper from his pocket. The last connecting link, the blackmail letter Reginald sent to his brother 10 days before the murder. Pay, or the curse will find you. Edmund kept it. We found it locked in his study desk. The same paper stock as Reginald's personal notepaper, the same ink, the same faint scent of his pipe tobacco. Reginald's head dropped. A low sound escaped him. Enough! Holmes stepped closer, voice calm but inexorable. You struck your brother at the Foundry Gate during an arranged meeting. You choked him into unconsciousness. You mutilated the body with borrowed tools to simulate a beast's attack. You transported him in your closed carriage to Southwark Bridge, arranged the scene under cover of fog, and planted misleading traces. The glove, the silk scrap, the button. To confuse pursuit, every link accounted for. The chain is complete. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Lestrade stepped forward, nodding to the constables. Reginald rose slowly, shoulders bowed, as they led him toward the door. His final glance at the room held no defiance, only the dull recognition of a man finally bound by the logic he could no longer evade. Miss Voss exhaled shakily. Then it is truly over. Holmes inclined his head. The innocent are cleared. The guilty is bound. Lestrade closed his notebook with a snap. Well, Holmes, another case closed by your infernal chain. Holmes gave a small, thin smile. Not infernal, Inspector. Merely inevitable. The door closed behind the prisoner and his escort. The fire crackled on, its warmth steady in the quiet room. Every link accounted for. The chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. The arrest of Sir Reginald Harrington unfolded with the quiet inevitability of a chain finally drawn taut. Dawn had barely broken over London. The next morning, when Lestrade arrived, 221B Baker Street, with 4 sturdy constables. The fog had cleared overnight, leaving the air sharp and cold. Gaslights still burned along Baker Street as their boots echoed on the 17 stairs. The coal fire in our sitting room crackled warmly against the chill, its light flickering across the familiar Persian rug and the worn leather armchairs. Holmes stood by the hearth, pipe in hand, the strong tobacco scent mingling with the faint leather polish of the room. Lestrade removed his damp tweed cap, nodding gravely. We're taking him from the cells to Bow Street for formal charging, Holmes. Thought you might wish to witness the close of your chain. Holmes inclined his head. I shall accompany you. Say certain details require final confirmation. We travelled together in two handsome cabs through the awakening city. The wheels clattered over cold cobbles, the bitter morning air carried the smell of coal smoke from thousands of chimneys and the faint briny tang of the distant Thames. Big Ben tolled 6 as we reached the police station near Bow Street, its deep notes vibrating through the crisp air. Inside the holding cells, the atmosphere was colder still, heavy, with the odour of damp stone, carbolic soap, and the metallic tang of iron bars. Reginald Harrington sat on a narrow bench in a small cell, his once fine tweed coat creased and stained, wrists manacled. He looked up as the heavy door clanged open, eyes hollow but defiant no longer. Lestrade stepped forward, voice formal. "Sir Reginald Harrington, you are charged with the wilful murder of your brother, Lord Edmund Harrington, by strangulation, followed by mutilation of the body, with intent to pervert the course of justice and simulate supernatural attack. You will be taken before the magistrate this morning." Reginald rose slowly, the chains clinking softly. I didn't intend, at first, only to frighten him into paying. The debts were crushing. When he refused again, his voice cracked. The old family tale of the werewolf. It seemed the perfect veil. No one would look beyond a monster. Holmes spoke quietly from the doorway. "Yet the ground remembered your steps, Sir Reginald. The iron ore in the mud, the fresh stitching on the planted glove, the button torn in your struggle, all spoke of a man, not a beast." Reginald's shoulders slumped further. "I thought the legend would protect me. Fear blinds men to reason." The constables moved to escort him. Reginald made no resistance, but as they led him toward the corridor, he turned once more to Holmes. "You saw through it from the first link, didn't you? One observation, and the whole chain formed." Holmes met his gaze steadily. "Observation defeats deception, Sir Reginald, every time." They emerged into the pale morning light, and a small crowd of newspapermen and curious onlookers had already gathered outside the station, drawn by whispers of the Werewolf of Southwark case. Camera flashes popped, reporters shouted questions. Lestrade raised a hand for silence as Reginald was helped into the prison van, its iron door slamming shut with finality. The vehicle rumbled away over the cobbles, wheels crunching gravel, leaving only the echo of chains and the faint smell of coal smoke in its wake. Back at Scotland Yard, later that morning, Lestrade spread the case files across his desk in the warm office where a small fire burned in the grate. The air carried the scent of ink, old paper, and hot tea from a steaming pot. Holmes and I sat opposite him. The inspector's rough tweed sleeves were rolled up as he reviewed statements. "Loose ends tied neatly, Holmes," he said, untapping the documents. "Jenkins has been fully exonerated. His foundry work explains the iron filings, his pub alibi held firm. Miss Voss's emotional distress was real, but never murderous. Her landlady's testimony clears her completely. Dr. Crow's tools were misused without his knowledge. He's cooperating fully and has even offered to assist in analysing any remaining trace evidence for the Crown. Thorne's rivalry was genuine, but his warehouse men confirm he never left long enough to reach the bridge." Holmes nodded, drawing upon his pipe. "And the planted silk scrap." Reginald admitted purchasing a packet of Thorne's cheap tobacco blend days earlier, rubbing it on the cloth to divert suspicion. A clumsy red herring, but effective for a time. I leaned forward. "The family legend. Will it haunt the Harrington name?" Lestrade shrugged. "Then the press will sensationalize it for weeks, but the truth will out. Reginald's confession covers every detail. The meeting at the foundry, the chokehold when Edmund refused payment again, the use of Crow's tools to create the mauling effect, the carriage transport under fog cover, the careful planting of misleading clues. No supernatural element survives scrutiny." Holmes set his pipe aside. "Superstition thrives in darkness. Deduction brings light. Lestrade closed the file with a satisfied snap. Scotland Yard owes you another debt, Holmes. Without your chain, we'd have chased shadows and howls instead of a man driven by debt and desperation. Holmes gave a small, thin smile. The game was afoot, Inspector. Now it is concluded. We departed Yard in the strengthening daylight. Hansom cabs clattered past. 8 street vendors called their wares. The city resumed its steady pulse. The bitter chill lingered, but the fog had gone entirely, leaving London's spires sharp against a pale sky. At 221B that evening, the coal fire burned as brightly as ever, its warmth a quiet celebration. Mrs. Hudson brought sweet brandy. Its taste lingered pleasantly as Holmes and I sat in companionable silence. The criminal bound, justice served. Chapter 9. Links restored. With Sir Reginald Harrington committed to stand trial at the Old Bailey, the slow machinery of Victorian justice began its measured turn. The fog that had plagued London for so many days had given way to clear, biting autumn weather. Gaslights burned with steady brightness along the streets, and the clatter of hansom cabs sounded sharper against the cold cobblestones. Then, at 221 B Baker Street, the coal fire burned as warmly as ever, its crackle a constant companion, while the faint scent of Holmes's strong tobacco drifted through the room, mingling with the leather polish of our armchairs and the polished wood of the chemical apparatus. The trial itself lasted only 3 days. The courtroom at the Old Bailey was packed, reporters scribbling furiously, members of society craning to catch every word, the air thick with the smell of damp wool coats, old varnish, and the faint metallic tang of ink from the clerks' desks. Reginald appeared pale, but composed in the dock, his rough tweed replaced by sober black broadcloth. His counsel, a nervous barrister, attempted to argue diminished responsibility through family history and financial strain. But the chain Holmes had forged proved unbreakable. The physical evidence was presented methodically. The kid glove with its incriminating wool dye, the brass button bearing the Harrington crest, the iron ore mud samples matched to Reginald's estate, Dr. Crow's claw tools with their precise spacing demonstrated before the jury on wax models. The blackmail telegram and the final threatening letter were read aloud in the hushed room. Reginald's own confession, given freely after his arrest, sealed every link. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of guilty of willful murder. The judge, in his scarlet robes, pronounced sentence, death by hanging, to be carried out in 3 weeks' time. Outside the court, the newspapermen surged forward, notebooks open, voices clamouring. "Mr. Holmes!" A word on the werewolf myth. Was it ever truly believed? Holmes declined comment with a curt nod, guiding me through the crowd to a waiting hansom. The wheels clattered away over the cobbles, leaving the clamour behind. In the days that followed, the innocent parties were quietly cleared and their futures set right. Miss Eliza Voss received a modest settlement from the Harrington estate, administered by the executors to spare her further public scrutiny. She visited 221B1 crisp afternoon, bringing a small posy of late roses whose faint scent mingled pleasantly with the coal smoke from our fire. Her eyes were brighter than I had seen them. The tremor in her hands had gone. "I shall leave London for a time," she told us, seated on the settee. "A cousin in Bath has invited me. That perhaps there I can begin again without whispers of monsters following me." Holmes inclined his head. "A wise course. Miss Voss, the chain that bound you has been broken." Jenkins, the valet, fared better still. The new heir, a distant cousin, with no stain upon his name, reinstated him at once, raising his wages and offering a small cottage on the estate. Jenkins called at Baker Street to express his thanks, standing awkwardly in the doorway, cap in hand. "I thought my life finished when Lord Edmund dismissed me," he said quietly. "But your chain saved me, Mr. Holmes." The chain merely revealed what was already true. Holmes replied. "You had no part in the crime." Dr. Harlan Crowe, too, emerged unscathed. Far from discredited, his reputation grew when it became known that his anatomical tools had been misused without his knowledge. Then he published a sober pamphlet on the physiology of claw marks versus manufactured wounds, dedicating it to the science of observation that defeats superstition. He sent Holmes a copy. My friend placed it on the shelf beside his monograph on tobacco ash. Elias Thorne, whose name had briefly been dragged through the press, found his business prospects unexpectedly improved. With Reginald's debts exposed and the estate's tangled affairs unravelled, several of Thorne's old contracts, unfairly cancelled by Edmund, were reinstated by the executors. He sent a gruff note of thanks to Baker Street, together with a crate of fine cigars whose rich aroma soon filled our rooms. London itself seemed to breathe more easily. The Werewolf of Southwark headlines faded from the front pages, replaced by reports of trade, politics, and the coming winter. Hansom cabs rattled along the streets once more, without passengers, glancing nervously at shadows. The foghorns on the Thames sounded merely mournful, rather than ominous. Gas lights flickered steadily along the bridges, and the river carried its usual traffic of barges and steamers without whispers of beasts. One evening, as the fire crackled brightly and Mrs. Hudson brought up a tray of hot tea whose bitter steam rose in comforting curls, Holmes sat in his armchair, legs stretched toward the hearth, pipe in hand. I sipped the strong brew, its warmth spreading through me against the chill outside. "The city returns to its rhythm," I observed. "No more talk of werewolves in the public houses." Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe. "Superstition is a weed, Watson. It flourishes where facts are neglected. We merely cleared the ground." I looked across at him, marveling once again at the quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "And the Harrington name?" "Will endure," he said. "Scars remain, but scars heal. The true chain, logic, observation, evidence, restores order where fear had disordered it." Outside, Big Ben tolled the hour, its deep notes carrying clearly through the crisp night air. Footsteps sounded on the pavement below. A distant violin drifted from a neighbouring window. London moved on, its pulse steady once more. Order restored to London's streets. Chapter 10. By the fire at Baker Street. Several weeks had passed since the last echoes of Sir Reginald Harrington's trial faded from the newspapers. London had settled once more into its familiar rhythm, the clatter of hansom cabs over frosted cobbles, the distant toll of Big Ben marking the hours, the steady hiss of gas lights along Baker Street as evening drew in. At 221B, the coal fire burned with a steady, cheerful crackle, its warmth spreading through the sitting room and chasing away the sharp winter chill that pressed against the window panes. The air carried the comforting blend of strong tobacco from Holmes's Persian slipper, the faint leather scent of our armchairs, and the rich aroma of Mrs. Hudson's hot tea steaming on the tray she had just set down. I sat opposite Holmes, in my usual chair, legs stretched toward the hearth, a glass of sweet brandy in my hand. Its warmth lingered pleasantly on my tongue after the cold walk back from the Strand. Holmes reclined in his armchair, pipe between his lips, eyes half closed as he watched the flames dance. Then the Stradivarius rested on the table beside him. He had played a quiet, meditative air earlier, the notes still seeming to linger in the room. "The evening papers have finally let the matter rest," I remarked, unfolding the latest edition. A brief paragraph on page 5. "Harrington execution carried out at dawn, no disturbance, no more headlines of werewolves or Southwark monsters." Holmes drew slowly on his pipe, smoke curling upward. "Superstition dies hard, Watson, but facts are stronger. The city has moved on, as it always does." We sat in companionable silence for a time, the fire crackling, the gasogene fizzing softly on the sideboard. Outside, footsteps passed on the pavement below. A distant violin drifted from another window. I set the paper aside and looked across at my friend. "Looking back," I said, The case seems almost inevitable in retrospect. Yet, at the beginning, there was only fog, superstition, and a single observation. The uneven pressure in those paw prints. Holmes's eyes opened fully, gleaming with that peculiar light. Precisely. The chain method, Watson, is nothing more than relentless connection of minutiae. Each link, an observation, a trace, a contradiction, must be forged by logic alone. The first link was the prints. Weight, distributed as a man, shifting awkwardly in artificial paws. Not a natural quadruped. From there the chain grew. Iron ore in the mud, fresh stitching on the planted glove, the brass button, the blackmail letter, the timeline of the club absence. Link by link, the myth dissolved until only one man remained. He leaned forward slightly, steepling his fingers. Compare it to the Hound of the Baskervilles. There, too, a spectral beast terrorized the moor, phosphorescent paint on a real dog, trained to pursue and terrify. The legend was ancient, the fear genuine, yet every physical trace, the footprints, the glowing jaws, the late-night howls, revealed human agency. Deduction stripped away the supernatural veil and exposed Stapleton's greed. So here, Reginald revived a family legend to mask fratricide. But the ground remembered the carriage wheels, the tools remembered their borrower, the paper remembered the ink and the hand that wrote the threats. Observation defeats deception because the material world cannot lie. I nodded slowly. You always begin with the impossible eliminated. No werewolf exists, therefore the wounds must be manufactured. No natural beast leaves uniform spacing, therefore tools were used. No creature transports its prey after death, therefore the body was moved. When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Exactly, Holmes said, a rare note of quiet satisfaction in his voice. The science of deduction is not magic, Watson. It is disciplined attention to data. Every scent, every texture, every sound, every temperature shift tells a story if one listens. The bitter fog that hid the scene also preserved the mudflecks. The coal smoke drifting from the foundries carried iron ore particles that clung to boots. The cold, morgue chill revealed post-mortem lividity patterns. Even the sweet brandy we drink now contrasts with the metallic taste of blood at the bridge. Small contrasts that sharpen perception. He paused, drawing deeply on his pipe. The chain is strongest when forged patiently. Rush the links and they snap. Test them, as we did with each suspect, and the weak ones shatter while the true ones hold. Reginald's flight was the final proof. The guilty man runs when the chain tightens beyond endurance. I sipped my brandy, feeling its warmth spread through me. And yet you were bored before the case began. Idle, restless, playing discordant notes on the violin. Holmes gave a small smile. The mind requires occupation, Watson. A puzzle worthy of the faculties. When none presents itself, the world seems grey. Then comes the knock at the door, the visitor with a problem that defies ordinary explanation. And the game is afoot once more. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, a hansom cab rattled past, its wheels crunching faintly on the thin frost. Holmes set his pipe aside and reached for the Stradivarius, plucking a single, soft note. To the listener who has followed this chain, from first link to last, he said, almost as though addressing someone beyond the room. Remember this, the world is full of deceptions, legends, superstitions, lies told to cover greed or fear. But the material world leaves traces. A fleck of mud, a torn button, a mismatched alibi. Each is a link, waiting to be forged. Observe closely, question relentlessly, connect patiently. In time, the chain will bind the truth, and order will return. He plucked another note, low and thoughtful. Forge your own chains, dear reader. Let no mystery withstand the light of reason. The fire crackled on, its warmth steady and sure. Holmes returned the violin to its case. I finished my brandy and set the glass down. The city outside moved quietly through the winter night. Footsteps on stairs, distant foghorns long silent now, gaslights burning clear. Until the next chain forges. Dear listener, the game continues.